going to show you what's involved with installing a new wood floor. Now, most people go with pre-finished planks, but unfinished wood flooring is also available, and we'll talk about both. Also, you can either nail down your new wood floor or you can float it over a foam underlayment. So we'll cover both of those options as well.
Whatever type of wood flooring you choose, first make sure the subfloor is in good shape. Preferably it's plywood, at least 3/4 of an inch thick. But you can also add a layer of 1/2 inch plywood over an existing subfloor, as Joanne Liebler and I did on one of our earlier projects. And always run the new flooring perpendicular to the joist for maximum support.
Before starting any wood flooring project, it also makes sense to cut off the bottoms of your door jambs and casing so the new flooring slides in underneath the trim rather than having to notch around it. Jamb saws are specially made for this job. Just use a scrap of the new flooring as a guide to give you the right height. As for the actual installation, let's start with the nail-down, pre-finished wood floor Dean and I worked on at one of our addition projects.
It used to be that installing a new wood floor was a multi-step process, nailing it down, sanding, staining, and finishing it. But with these pre-finished planks, it's pretty much just a one-step process.
Yeah, they come with a urethane finish and the stain color we ordered. And we figure it costs us about $6 per square foot to install these ourselves. And that compares to about $9 per square foot to install and finish regular wood flooring. So we're saving about 30%.
The flooring runs from the family room into the kitchen, and we want the seams to be nice and straight. So we snapped a chalk line parallel to this wall and extended it into the kitchen as a guideline.
We start with the first row up against the wall, but we don't use the wall as a guide, especially in older homes. This could be out of line.
Yeah, so what we did is measured back from this first chalk line and marked off this guideline. You ready to cut that first one?
Just about all set. Now we're putting the groove side up against the wall, and I place these little spacers here to make sure we have enough room for expansion up against the wall. Now the first thing I want to do is cut out this little area here above the heating duct.
Okay, I got it.
Ah, thanks. I'll nail through the back of this board and through the tongue. There's a gap back here, and the nails will be covered up later with base and base shoe. Okay, right there.
Now we'll just finish the rest of this first wall and work our way out across the floor.
Now this is a power floor nailer. It's hooked up to an electric air compressor. It has a fairly wide base, so you can't get it too close to the wall, which means you can't use it to do the first row. But once you hit the open field like this, you can really move the thing, so it's definitely worth renting if you're going to be doing a lot of flooring.
These nailers can throw the planks offline, so if you've got any crooked seams, they're going to be really obvious. Those blocks that we set up earlier against the wall also help to hold things in place. Now, we're going to be measuring every so often from the snap chalk line to the boards that we're working on, just to keep things equal. Okay, that looks good over there.
Okay.
One thing to remember about wood floors is that wood needs to adjust to the humidity in your house, and that's pretty important. Otherwise, you'll have problems down the road. Now, dry wood swells in humid areas, and wet wood shrinks when it dries. I'm going to get some more wood.
Okay.
If you install your wood flooring right off the truck, you could get gaps or buckling at the joints, which looks pretty bad. To avoid this, open up the box and let them sit for a couple of days to adjust to the humidity level. Got it. Wow, here we go.
That covers the basic steps of nailing down a new pre-finished wood floor. On a different project, Joanne Liebler and I nailed down an unfinished solid oak floor. The basic techniques are the same, but let's show you a couple variations that might be applicable on your project. For example, we plan to have the new wood floor run into an angled step down at one opening into the room. So we first cut and installed a piece of oak step nosing to finish the edge of that. Nosing is a type of floorboard routed on the bottom so the back of the board stays flush along the step and the front edge hangs over the riser like a stair tread. Nosing like this gets a lot of wear and tear, so we both glued the bottom and nailed it down to hold it securely. With the nosing in, we then set a baseline for the first board, measuring off the wall as we did on the earlier project. But with unfinished wood flooring, it's a good idea to leave at least a ½ inch gap against the wall for expansion and contraction. If you take your base trim off before starting, it'll cover the gap when you put it back on. Now add that gap to the width of the flooring, which was 2¼ inches in this case, and snap a chalk line that distance from the wall. Then you're ready for the first course. In this case, we started in the open floor along the nosing, so we first nailed down a temporary guide board to keep the first board in line as we secured it. We also spread glue under it to help secure it. By the way, we mitered all the boards on this end to fit flush against the angled nosing. And after pre-drilling the first oak board, we face nailed it to secure it in place since the floor nailer might have knocked it offline. I notice that we set the tongue and groove board with the groove against the guide board. Then we use the floor nailer to drive a nail through the tongue, which will later be hidden by the groove of the next board. That's called blind nailing. The next few boards of the first course carried us along the wall, so we face nailed those to secure them. But we also pre-drilled and nailed each one through the tongues to fully secure them. The nailer doesn't fit against the wall, so we used a hammer. Once we moved on to the second course, we had plenty of room for the nailer. This one doesn't need power or a compressor, but it does need a pretty good pop to drive each nail. By the way, after gluing the first course to the subfloor, we rolled 15-pound builder's felt over the subfloor and started setting the boards. It helps limit squeaks and creaks. You can also use plastic or rosin paper.
With tongue and groove flooring, you always want to be setting the groove of one board against the tongue of the previous board. But sometimes you have to change direction with a do-it-yourself tongue known as a spline. You glue up one side and set it in the groove of your starting board. Then the groove of the next board will slip over the spline as you start working in that direction. To finish a floor, you'll probably end up against a wall, so you may have to rip the last course to fit. You won't be able to use the nailer, but you can spread some glue on the subfloor and set the boards over that. Now use a pry bar to get them tight against the previous boards and then face nail them to fully secure them. Then with unfinished flooring like this, you sand, stain, and finish the boards as we showed you at the beginning of the tape. Now for the last segment of the tape, we'd like to show you the basic steps in floating a wood floor, like the engineered product we used in one of our addition projects.
Now we're using these engineered wood planks. They're a ½ inch thick. We're going to be setting them on top of our radiant floor. Now these are made with 3 different layers. I don't know if you can see that or not. It makes them a lot more stable as the temperature is rising and falling on the floor as well as the humidity.
There's still going to be some movement though, so rather than gluing or nailing, we're floating the floor on top of this foam underlayment and leaving some small gaps at the walls for expansion. That's critical to prevent any buckling or separation at the glue joints.
Now with a system like this, the tongue and grooves fit very precisely, which is great for a nice fitting floor, but at the same time, if the humidity gets too high, it can be just about impossible to install. So we really recommend that you keep them in the package before you install them. And of course, like any hardwood floor, it's always great to acclimate it to the space prior to installation.
Now this underlayment is really nice since it has this little adhesive strip along the edges, so when you put it down it'll stick rather than slide around. And it's also somewhat transparent so you can see your guidelines as you're moving along.
Now in floating a wood floor like this, they always recommend that you run it parallel to the longest wall in the room. And then you don't start by laying the flooring right up against that wall. Instead, what you do is measure out one width of the flooring from the wall at a ½ inch for expansion and contraction, and then lay in a straight edge. And then shim that straight edge out from the wall so it's good and solid. Then you start laying the flooring up against that. Now the reason is, if your wall isn't perfectly straight, and most walls aren't, that any undulations or anything will start showing up in your joints. By doing it this way, everything stays nice and tight, just the way you want. I'm going to cut this, I'll be right back. Now for our stand-up here, we went with a wine color, which comes very close to matching the Cabernet color on some of our cabinets. But for the floor, we went with a contrasting color. This is what they call country cherry. Now, I think it's very important to realize, you want to glue up the end of that, here's the glue. Whenever you're working with engineered wood flooring like this, the colors may vary slightly from box to box. So it makes a lot of sense to open up 2 boxes and then just pull every other one from each of those so that you don't end up with alternating bands of different shades as you're running across the floor. Okay.